Ready? All right. Without further ado, carrying this message, Recovered versus Recovering, Jonathan.
Hey, I'm Jonathan. I'm alcoholic. Thank you so much, Scott, for that message. I wanted to thank Patrick and Dave for getting everything set up. It's been a real, me and Marcia have had a blast since we've been here. I'm honored and humbled because, like Scott said, I have lots of heroes in AA, and Chris and Peter have been very instrumental in my sobriety, and more recently Rich, and like I said, Scott's done a great job, and one of my biggest heroes, Marcia, will speak on Saturday. So when me and Marcia were flying over from Houston to Liberia, we were lucky enough to sit in first class, and there was a couple sitting in front of us that were bickering back and forth. And the husband told the wife, "It's not my fault that you're so old and can't hear." And then she would say something back to him, and this went on for probably a half hour. Then finally we heard the wife tell the husband, "You know, this medication that I'm on, it says that alcohol is not contraindicated with what I'm taking." So me and Marcia both leaned into each other and just said, "Please, God, let them have a drink." You know? So they ordered their Bloody Marys or whatever. It was the morning flight, and it was almost instant. The wife looked over the husband and said, "Aren't these eggs delicious?" Husband was like, something else nice. And, it just switched like that. And I thought, what a good example of what alcohol does for me and does to me, It was a good introduction to the workshop that we were going to come to. My sobriety date is May 13th of 2008. And I have a home group. Actually, I have two home groups. I have an Alcoholics Anonymous home group, carry this message at 6 p.m. on Monday evenings in Austin, if anyone's ever in Austin, Texas. I also have a Cocaine Anonymous home group, which is Freedom in the Solution, on Saturday nights at 7 in Georgetown, Texas. Welcome to come to both. I'm sponsored, and I sponsor a lot of guys. And I've been very active in my own recovery since May 13th of 2008. So I'm very honored to be here. Chris or whoever was responsible for giving me this kind of divisive topic of recovered versus recovering. I'm really not that interested in sitting up here and telling you what my opinion is on what adjective you should use before you say you're an alcoholic. What I'm going to try to do is talk a little bit about what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. And kind of relate it to my own experience rather than any kind of opinion, which is the way that this thing has worked out for me since the beginning anyway. When I get to lay my own experience alongside what's in the big book, then I have more movement internally than if I just receive information. I was born and raised in Texas, and realized at a very young age that I felt separate from, my sister, raised in the same house, ate the same food, lived with the same parents, and it's totally normal. But I had this kind of low-level anxiety of people, of situations. There's no way that kid could have grown up to the man that I am today sitting in front of you all, because I did not like talking to groups. I did not feel comfortable looking at people in the eye. And kind of like Scott, I had no reason to feel that way. My parents were very supportive. They believed in me. My alcoholism is not causal. There were no circumstances that happened as a child that caused me to drink too much, you know. I first started drinking when I was about 14 or 15 years old. It was Bartles and James wine coolers. Had them in my, I know there's people that remember those. Had them in my closet. Yeah. And very quickly started, mounting some consequences. And they were reasonable consequences that I could kind of discard and keep going at that point. But I never really got that far into the drinking with impunity thing. It didn't get my attention enough to let me, consider stopping, but things happened fairly quickly when I put alcohol in my body. Like I had said before, I was always wanting to fit in, even though I would act aloof and act like I didn't care. I always wanted to fit in, and I didn't really. The popular crowd didn't really like me because I was in the band growing up, and then the band people didn't like me because I was kind of popular, and I just was never really could fit in, and alcohol fixed that. Alcohol fixed that. I went ahead and graduated from high school without too many. I mean, there was a couple of totaled cars and everything like that, but I went to a military college in South Carolina, an all-male school that I think that, based on being out now 25 years, seems to produce alcoholics. There's lots of recreational drinking, no women, and drinking to excess is somewhat encouraged there. And so that's when I really got my drinking under my belt. I finished that school in 4 years and decided that the next best thing for me to do would be to get married. And so I married a girl that I had met while I was there. It was not a good marriage. My alcoholism and addiction at this point had really taken its toll, and it was very, very one-sided. There was no kind of reciprocity, and I was drinking and using essentially the entire time that we were married, and we were together for 10 years. About a couple of years into it, we had decided to start thinking about having a child. My firstborn son Wyatt was born in 2000, and that was actually after we had been married 8 years. So for 8 years, it was just me, her, and drugs and alcohol and lots of dysfunction. At that point, I'm a veterinarian by trade. I was in vet school. I had attempted to separate from alcohol and drugs and was just not able to. 6 months short of graduating from vet school, I was kicked out for stealing a bottle of morphine, and I was sent to the first treatment center. This was in 1994, and spent 30 days there, drank and used the day I got out. My story involves a whole lot of tries at staying sober and a whole lot of failures. I have a lot of experience with attempting to do this thing and failing. On and on the years went. In 2002, my wife had enough and filed for divorce, and I went to a treatment center that specialized in dealing with veterinarians and lawyers and pharmacists and dentists and stuff like that, and kind of treated as if we have our own special version of alcoholism and addiction. And it didn't turn out too well. They spent a whole lot of time talking to me and the other patients there about taking a good, honest look at what alcohol and or drugs had done to your life. And I was talking to Chris and Marcia before dinner. One of the exercises they had us do was up on a whiteboard. We would each have to take turns, go up, and try and add up and calculate the cost of our addiction through DUIs, wrecked cars, drugs bought, etc., etc., etc. And I remember distinctly in 2002 looking at that and looking around the room and seeing lights come on in people's eyes with that assignment. And it did nothing for me. It did nothing for me. I thought, I don't really understand the point of this assignment. You know what I mean? I can add as many zeros as you want me to add. Alcohol and drugs still does something for me that's worth whatever dollar amount I put up on the board. And, one of the other things that happened at that treatment center is that I met one of my previous higher powers, Marcia. We met and essentially decided to kind of ride off in the sunset together. They suggested that I go to a long-term men's facility. They suggested Marcia go to a long-term women's facility. We said thank you for the information, but we've learned enough, and so we're going to go ahead and set out on our own. And we did that in 2002. From 2002 to 2005, roughly, Marcia and I were abstinent, and that's how I would describe it at this point. We left that treatment center with our relapse prevention plan, and we're dead set on going to as many meetings as we could, and we had a desperate desire to stay sober, and that lasted for 3 years, and it was based on meeting attendance, and it was based on acquisition and accumulation of things. We had both experienced lots of material downfall through our alcoholism and our addiction, but had pretty much started from square one. I mean, she's an attorney by trade, and like I said, I was a veterinarian. Neither one of us worked for a while, and we kind of just organized our day around going to meetings and trying not to drink or use drugs one day at a time. And that worked for about that worked until it didn't work anymore. And it didn't work anymore somewhere around 2005. And in 2005, she had started drinking. I started, I think I broke my hand and was prescribed Vicodin or something, and kind of went off on the pain med type spree. And very soon after that, probably around 2007, one of the more important things is in 2005 we had our one and only child, Sheldon, who's 7 now. But anyway, so we had Sheldon, and Marcia had 3 kids from a previous marriage. I had 1, and then we have Sheldon together. And in 2007, something else entered the picture, and that was cocaine. And Marcia and I are kind of a unique commodity in terms of. I think now on this side of things, we can be a real strong power for good. Back then, and on self-will, we can be a real strong power the opposite way. And it's kind of me and Marcia against the world when it's me and Marcia running on our own will, with no God and no recovery in the picture. The whole thing accumulated in lots of whiskey and lots of cocaine. I don't want to, we don't need to go into the details of it, but essentially our life together exploded in early 2008, and fortunately we were surrounded by some. My family eventually convinced me to come to Texas. Marcia was intervened on by the attorneys in North Carolina and was sent to a place in Atlanta. So, in May of 2008, she was in Atlanta and I was in Texas, and that's really, I think, when my life began. And that's kind of what I want to start, focusing on. I'd landed in a place in Austin, Texas, that wasn't a treatment center, that was a recovery center. The main difference meaning that there are no LCDCs, there's no licensed psychotherapists. It's staffed by people that live and work the 12 steps, and while you're there, you go through all 12 steps, and it's straight out of the big book. And that's something that I hadn't been exposed to. I glossed over some of them, but I had gone to treatment multiple times. I mean, this time I landed in Austin was my 6th rehab. And the transformational experience that happened to me in the summer of 2008 is just astounding. And I have no other words to describe it. When we were going to meetings, when I was going to meetings from 2002 to 2005 in North Carolina, this is kind of the message that I received. And again, guys, I don't want you to think that I went to a meeting every couple of months or I went to a meeting maybe once a week. I was a meeting maker, all right? I mean, I was going to 6 or 7 meetings a week, all right? Desperate to stay away from alcohol and drugs and just not able to. And I think that, I picked up so many desire chips and sobriety chips and newcomer key tags and all that stuff. I mean, surely I could have found something better to do with my time than go and pick up those chips repeatedly and subject myself to the shame and humiliation that comes along with that. There had to have been something inside of me that desperately wanted to get and stay sober. And I just didn't know how to do it. And the people that were in those meetings, Marcia probably remembers one of them. One guy's name was Larry Z. And great guy. Really was one of my biggest cheerleaders for staying sober during that time when we couldn't. And he would say stuff. I mean, every night that I would come into the meeting, he would say, "How many days do you have today, Jonathan?" And I would say, "I got 3 days, Larry." So the next time that we would meet, he would ask me again. And I always had to be quick on my feet and calculate how many more days had passed since he asked me last time, so he would think that I was still sober. You know what I mean? Well, I got 10 days today, Larry. And he would say things like, "Well, Jonathan, you just got to think about it this way. Drinking is not an option." And I thought, I don't understand what you're saying when you say that. You know what I mean? Because it's the only option. It was the only option for me. I really thought that this was like just in North Carolina until I heard Chris and some other people say it. They really said in North Carolina, don't drink even if your ass falls off. I had never really thought that was, worldwide accepted, but I guess that it is. But anyway, so in 2008, what was introduced to me was the program of recovery right out of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And again, I had gone to meetings before, a slew of meetings, right? 13 years worth of meetings. But the meetings had always focused on either the stories in the back or reading a paragraph at a time and kind of sharing what you thought, about what we just read and stuff like that. And then just simple encouragement to not drink. And the frustrating thing is I was surrounded by people in North Carolina that worked for. The encouragement and the fellowship and stuff like that really worked for them. And I know that there's people probably in this room tonight that had this experience of coming into the fellowship and having the fellowship kind of nurse you and stuff like that until you felt ready to take the steps and get on the spiritual path. And that just isn't my experience. I couldn't stand people. I didn't really hate you. I couldn't get close. You know what I mean? I couldn't get close. I couldn't assimilate with people. And so for me, my experience is really just the opposite. I came in, I was isolated and segregated from the general population of the world for 3 months in Austin, and I was taken through these steps, and my spirit awakened. And once my spirit was awakened, then I could come to the meetings and participate and do some service commitments and stuff like that. So that's kind of how it happened in the summer of 2008. Specifically, I think what they talked to me about, and there's a couple of people that were very instrumental early on, and one of them, owned that recovery center. But the way that they presented the information in the big book was so enlightening. I had always wanted an explanation for why I behaved the way I behaved, and I never had it. My parents, the veterinary board, the legal teams, they would all say, Jonathan, you know that drinking and drugging is causing you problems. You had this period of separation. Why would you go back? And I would be speechless. I wouldn't know what the answer was, I just couldn't get, I don't know. That's the best that I could come up with. I was told to go through that big book, and instead of looking into the big book for answers, look more at the considerations that were posed, look at some questions, personalize it, turn statements into questions, use I instead of they or them, and all of a sudden things started making sense to me. When Doctor's Opinion talks about, we drink or use for the effect produced, what an understatement, I don't like the effect produced. I absolutely need the effect produced, And what I realized in 2008 for the first time is that this was possible. This was possible. It was possible to stay sober. Because, before, again, if we look at me starting to try to get sober in 1995 and not really even doing it until 2008, that's 13 years of thinking that what is wrong with me is too much alcohol and drugs when what is really wrong with me is too little power. And I had never heard that before. And what was always in my sights, every single morning when I got up with that firm resolution, was stay away from alcohol and drugs. Stay away from alcohol and drugs. And that was what was in my target. That was what was in my crosshair every single day. And every single time I went at it in that direction, I failed. It might have been a day, it might have been a week, it might have been 6 months, but eventually I put drugs and alcohol back into my body. What I was introduced to in 2008 is that this is a program of recovery, but it's not a way of not drinking and using one day at a time. I sincerely saw it as a manner of living, a way of life, And for me, at least, since that point, when I was beaten into a state of reasonableness, then what happened was I realized, or I was able to take direction to the extent that if I follow the directions in this book, and I practice this manner of living, this way of life, this way of living, then all of a sudden, as a byproduct, I don't find it necessary to put drugs and alcohol in my body. So the target was on the wrong thing, for me at least, for years and years and years. I practice this way of life, and as a byproduct, I don't put drugs and alcohol in my body. And that's probably one of the biggest things biggest revelations that had happened to me. Since 2008, man, all kinds of remarkable things have happened. Me and Marcia stayed separated until probably December of 2008. So she went and did her deal 7 or 8 months, and I did my deal 7 or 8 months. And no one in the room really knows, but we were like this. You could not separate us. She had no real girlfriends. I had no real guy friends. I mean, we were really, really, really enmeshed. And for us to take direction and follow some simple guidelines and some suggestions from someone other than ourselves is a really big deal, you know? I mean, because theoretically I could have gone and, you know, swept her back up in August of 2008 and she could have, you know, fled to Texas or whatever then, but we listened, you know, and I went to 3 months of sober living, and you know, she went to a halfway house in Atlanta, and there was a big time there, guys, where we weren't even sure we were going to be back together, you know. At the end of, right before we went into treatment, in January of 2008, this is what my life looked like. I was a veterinarian. I had a veterinary practice. Marcia was a lawyer. She had a law practice. We had a Mercedes GL 450 and a Yukon Denali and a big pool and a big house and all 5 kids. In May of 2008, the house was gone. Both cars were repossessed. All 5 kids were taken by Child Protective Services. My vet license was gone. Her law license was gone. My vet hospital was gone. Her law practice was gone. That's 150 days. From January until May of 2008. So that's kind of the way that I showed up to Texas. All right? Having that stuff leave your life tends to wake you up. You know? The book even says circumstances made him willing. You know? Circumstances will make me willing. At first I thought, you know, a long time that I heard people say in the room and stuff, yeah, but circumstances don't get you sober. No, I think that circumstances will wake you up. Without circumstances, I won't wake up. But the problem is me remembering and trying to drum up how much pain I was in 2008 ain't going to do for me trying to stay sober in the future, you know? So, you know, I like that Scott had touched on a few steps, you know. I mean, when I took that third step decision in the summer of 2008, I mean, this is what it looked like, you know. God, I really would like to be with Marcia, but if you don't want her with me, then don't put her back in my life. I really would like to see my kids again, but if you don't want me to see my kids, keep them out of my life. Now, guys, that's a startling position for someone like me to take. And I think that one of the reasons, I'm not one of those guys that's ever going to say, well, I wish I'd have gotten sober when I was 25. No, I got sober exactly when I was supposed to, and I got sober when I was 40. And the reason that I got sober when I got sober is this. All the roles that I had assigned myself, father, veterinarian, homeowner, car owner, husband, etc., were all gone. So I had nothing to hang my hat on. When I landed in Austin in 2008, shattered like that, I had nowhere to look, you know what I mean, but up. And as uncomfortable as that was in the summer of 2008, man, how grateful I am for it now, you know. Because if there had been any other, you know, door C, door number 3, there was only 2 doors, you know. I was either going to keep doing dope and drinking, or I was going to try and accept what was being offered to me in 2008. And I think, although my ego can paint Marcia and the kids and my vet practice and the house and stuff as gifts from God, really, they have the same likelihood, if I'm in that jumping off place, as being obstacles. You know, they can block me from having a real experience. And I was isolated. I was isolated in 2008, and that's exactly where I needed to be. So Marcia finally came back, and we decided to give this thing a go. And it was just me and Marcia at first. And here's another thing where we kind of took direction and stuff like that. You know, we desperately wanted to see the kids. I went 12 months without seeing any of my children. Marcia really wanted to come to Texas with the kids in tow. And we thought that might kind of, you know, derail her assimilating and me getting integrated into the recovery community in Austin and stuff. And it worked out exactly the way it was supposed to. Her mom was watching the children, and my son from my previous marriage was with his mother. And she came back in December, I think. So January, February, March. Eventually, in April of 2009, me and Marcia had gone through a whole bunch of fear and a whole bunch of worry and a whole bunch of when will they come home? We think we're ready, stuff like that. Marcia's mother just calls one day, said it's time for you to come get your kids, and so we drove to Georgia and picked up the children, and one piece of the puzzle kind of was back in place. I was willing, like I said, my vet license had been taken. I was willing to do whatever, So I got a job. I think 2 days out of the recovery center, I was in a sober house, and I took a job as a veterinary technician. I was sweeping, mopping, cleaning up dog poop, dog pee, cat litter pans, et cetera, making $9 an hour, and I was happier than I'd ever been, I started sponsoring guys 3 months sober. So this was September, I think, of 2008, and I haven't stopped since. That, what the Big Book points to, that really has been a bright spot in my life. I love how Scott had said, that I have a purpose. You would think having 5 kids would give me a purpose. You would think being a veterinarian, being a husband, et cetera, would give me a purpose. But my whole life, all 40 years, I kind of felt like a pinball in a pinball machine, I just bouncing into one thing. And, the shine would wear off so quickly after anything new. Nothing really lit my fire or woke me up, until I got sober. And until I started trying to do this deal in terms of this way of life, this manner of living. And, our life today is it's just fantastic. I have lots of abundance and prosperity, and it's not just the material kind. I don't think that if I consider myself recovered, I don't think that it's because I have a house, that I got my vet license back, that I have, some money in the bank. I think that's probably a natural consequence, but it's inside here. You know what I mean? It's inside here. It's the fact that I can put my head on my pillow at night and fall asleep. Those 3 years from 2002 to 2005 that we were abstinent? I was abstinent from the majority of everything. But check this out. Every single night, I had to go get Alka-Seltzer Nighttime Plus and drink it. Every single night to go to sleep for 3 years. Now, do you think that I had a cold or the flu for 3 years? No. I had to treat something within me. You remove alcohol and drugs from me and I get worse, not better. And I think that was reflected in my need for something to try and help me at night. We've had Big Book studies at our house, which has been really cool. We had that going on for a couple years. I have a service commitment teaching Big Book out at the same recovery center that I went through on Wednesdays. I teach the guys and the girls. I've had a whole lot of experience, with amends as well. One of them that I wanted to share was the fact that, about 3 years ago, I was able to make amends to Marcia's ex-husband, a guy who I really didn't care for and didn't really appreciate the way he treated the kids that I've been raising for the last 10 years or the way he treated Marcia. And, I think this is very, very indicative of kind of that ripple effect I think that we've all experienced. When I'm drinking and drugging and some event happens, there's always a negative ripple, and I might see it a little down the road. I might see it here. It may be one of my, kids' friends or something like that, but there's definitely a ripple effect. There's the same type of ripple effect with positive spiritual things, too. When I made amends to that man, his name is John, this was probably in 2009, I didn't think anything more of it. wasn't any kind of real earth-shattering thing. I tried to look at the book and see that it said, the harder the amend, maybe the bigger the benefit, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't really experience that. Anyway, last month, he emailed me. He occasionally Facebooked me and stuff like that over the years. Active alcoholic and addict. And he emailed me almost exactly a month ago and said, "Hey, Jonathan, I hope everything is going well. Will you give Marcia my phone number? I'd really like to talk to her. I have a friend that would like to get into the clinic," which I guess is maybe a layman's term for a recovery center. I was swamped that day at work. I had every reason in the world just to delete that email. I had deleted plenty of emails in the past, but I didn't. I forwarded the email to Marcia. Marcia talked to her ex-husband of 12 years, the father of 3 of my stepchildren that day. And they had a brief conversation, but he was able to ask about his children, and also he was able to tell Marcia how pleased he was that he had kind of moved back home and was living with his dad, and they had kind of mended some fences because they always had a strained relationship. That night we get a call that he jumped off a bridge that night in Virginia, border of Virginia and Maryland, and killed himself. Empty bottles of wine in an unattended truck at the top of a big gorge. And there was a lot of, feelings and emotions in our house. The kids were devastated, racked with the questions, I wonder if I'd have called him more, et cetera, et cetera. The next day, I get an email from his father saying, "Can you get me in touch with Marcia? I want to talk to her about John's death." And so I forward the email to Marcia. She gets to talk to his father. So here's kind of the way I see it. I didn't see it at the time, but as time went on over the last few weeks, I've noticed this. If I hadn't been able to see my mistakes and my wrongdoings with this man, then I never would have gotten to the place where I'd be willing to make amends. If I hadn't made amends to that man, I probably would have deleted his email and not forwarded it to Marcia. Had that happened, she wouldn't have been able to talk to her ex-husband of 12 years the day before he died. And then when the father got in touch with Marcia, she wouldn't have been able to set the father's mind at ease because he was very racked with guilt and shame about the way he had treated his son. And none of that would have been possible. I mean, all that, how that started was with the 4th step. That's where that thing started, and to be able to experience and participate in something like that is really astounding, The one of the other, harder amends that I had made was, to my 4-year-old, who was two. He was 2, I think, when we were doing it, and I came out and I talked to my sponsor and I said, I think that it's really ridiculous for me to sit across from a 3 or 4-year-old kid and kind of go through the formal amends process. I just don't think that that's, I was just going to take him off my list and move on to the next one. Well, Marcia was gone somewhere. We were living in an apartment, and I took him upstairs and I said, Sheldon, I need to talk with you. And now 99% of the time, he's a 3 or 4-year-old kid, and he's spazzing, he's looking around and, not paying attention and just being hyper and wanting to wrestle and stuff. And I didn't even tell him for sure what I needed to talk to him about. But when I said that to him, he locked eyes on me. And he sat there and he met my gaze. And I went through the process as it was described for me to do. I kind of told him the harms that I was clear on. I didn't say anything about drugs, I just kind of, I told him that I had made some mistakes and fought with his mom and hadn't seen him for a year, et cetera, et cetera. And when I asked him if there was anything I missed or how that made him feel, he said, "I didn't ever think I was going to see you again, Dad." And started crying, and I started crying, and the one thing that happened that was consistent with a 3 or 4-year-old is when I asked him, "Sheldon, is there anything I can do at this point to make things right with you?" He said, "You can come play Xbox with me." And I was able to pull that amends off, no problem. I loved completing that one because I played the Xbox with him. But look at that too. That never would, if I had been in charge and if I had been making the decisions on my own, I would have just discarded that one as probably pointless, and let's get on to some of the others that are more meaningful, and I would have deprived myself of that, of that experience. I've made all amends that I'm consciously aware of. And I really feel like having the experience of what happened with Marcia's ex-husband and stuff like that is world of the spirit, sixth sense type stuff. And, it's just tremendous. I mean, there's bylaws in the veterinary Practice Act in Texas that say you can't practice veterinary medicine with felonies. Well, I have 2 felonies. And last time I checked, I'm a veterinarian. How does that stuff happen? We filed bankruptcy a year and a half before we bought a really nice house. How does that happen? Stuff like that doesn't happen. Can't be explained logically in the material world. I really believe kind of what Marcia was talking about last night with that meditation process. That 3rd step is a very powerful thing. It's a very powerful decision to make. And the 3rd step promises, some people have big experiences with 5th step. Some of them have them, with 9th step or 12th step stuff. But I had my big experience after step 3. And that has been my experience all along in terms of, God does provide what I need. He does provide what I need. It may not always be what I want, but that's the other delusion that has been smashed over the last few years, is that it's not always that I want this and what I need is this. Sometimes they're the exact same thing. I think it puts too much distance between me and God to say that all the time my stuff is over here and His stuff is over here. Lots of times it ends up being one and the same. And not 2 separate. Me and Marcia were talking earlier today. It is so cool to be able to travel. I can't imagine, Scott, you were talking about the places you've been. I can't imagine that. But I was tethered wherever I went. Me and Marcia couldn't go on a weekend jaunt without making sure that we had enough. We've cut trips short. I've had to, rein her in and kind of reschedule things, and to live this life free of abundance with tons of contentment and serenity, et cetera, et cetera. It is such a blast, It is such a blast, and I think that the kind of what we were talking about before, in terms of recovering. Again, I don't want to get in the middle of that controversy. I believe that I have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. I think that I've been given the power to help others. And what's interesting to me is permanent sobriety. That's the only thing that I'm in this for. Trying to stay sober one day at a time doesn't have any depth and weight to me. And not only that, based on my experience, I know that I can't pull it off. I know I can't pull it off. All 5 kids have been reassembled in our lives to some extent. 4 out of the 5 live with us. The one, my youngest, or my oldest biological son, Wyatt, in North Carolina, he comes out and visits all summers. He's going to come 2 days after we get back from this trip for another week. And that lady, his mom, has every right in the world to not ever have him come see me again. I've caused enough damage and caused her enough fear and worry to warrant something like that. And for him to be able to come out and stay with us, 1,500 miles away, with kind of no supervision, no mediator, no nothing like that. I mean, guys, it's only been 4 years. It's only been 4 years. I think the important thing, too, to remember, for me at least, in step 12, is that for the longest time I tried to carry this message to other alcoholics, but wasn't always willing to attempt to practice these principles in all my affairs. And that's been something that's been brought to the forefront kind of over the last year and a half or two, in terms of, work, home life, driving on the road. I mean, all those things are different types of ways that I'm able to kind of check my spiritual status. I always thought for the longest time that I was a chronic relapser. I really don't think I was. I don't think I was ever really, I don't think I was ever in recovery until 2008. And since then, I haven't found it necessary to drink or use. I think that no matter how many excuses I would give myself, if I relapsed, I would relapse for one reason only, and that's because of a failure to maintain and enlarge my spiritual condition. And I do that, like the book says, by work and self-sacrifice for others. So this has been an honor and a privilege talking to you guys. I really appreciate you listening. Look forward to hearing from the other speakers. Thank you.
Yeah, Jonathan, Chris picked that topic for you. I picked the topic for Chris, though.